Last week we heard about how Terry gave his life to the Lord. This week we pick up a little further along in his story. As so often happens when we are bowled over by the love and the grace and the forgiveness of God, Terry can't wait to get out and tell other people all about it. He's a musician and he has big dreams to form a music team that will go out all over Canada, possibly into the United States and across to other continents, to play music that will touch the hearts of young people and to share the message that changed his life. But he has a little problem: no money. The solution came through one of the church elders, a man named Ed Stahl. The first time I met Ed, it was like shaking hands with quiet lightning. He owned a vast cattle ranch. In his 50s and greying slightly, there was nevertheless a bright youthfulness about him and a quality I could not put my finger on. I was glad when he asked me to work for him. Throughout that fall, I talked to people in the church about my idea. Whenever I tried to explain my dream of a contemporary gospel team, I met with blank looks. Once a man even shrugged and said, "A group like that will never make a go in Canada." A damp, stifled feeling draped itself over me that winter. One day, early in spring 1967, I decided to discuss my discouragement with Ed. In the months I'd worked for him, he had listened to my ideas about a new kind of music ministry and had gained my respect. Not only was he a fine cattle breeder, but he could not speak the name of Jesus without his eyes misting. He often walked the fields lost in prayer. His apparent communion with God was startling. The day I wanted to talk with Ed, he drove me out to a certain field in his pickup truck. "I asked the Lord to show me a new well site," he explained as we got out. That God would direct him to water hidden in the rock strata beneath the earth was as matter-of-fact to Ed as branding a Hereford cow. Trampling along at his side through the Russian wild ryegrass, I had to smile. In jeans and a faded work shirt, he looked anything but the prophet. It's about the group," I began. Ed scanned the horizon and I wondered if he'd heard me. "Young people are listening to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. I know we can reach them with the new music for Jesus, but things just aren't going right." Ed had stopped at the top of a grassy knoll. I pressed him. "What do you think?" "I think this is it," he smiled. "What?" "This is where we drill the new well," Ed went on calmly. Glancing across the fields, I could see no apparent fault lines that distinguished the site at all. Then he turned and walked back to the pickup. "Let's set some dynamite." Feeling hurt that he'd ignored me, I watched as Ed showed me how to set the charge. As far as I could tell, this was no place to blast a well. Then we dropped back behind some trees. Even with fingers stuffed in my ears, I jumped when the roar of dynamite blew large rocks high in the air. When we examined the crater, it was bone dry. Ed sniffed. "Guess this one'll take 2 charges." Was he still holding on to the idea that God had told him there was water here? I bit my tongue. We set off another charge. This time, when we reached the edge of the hole, a small trickle of water was collecting in a little circle of mud at the bottom, but still no gusher. "Go get a shovel from the truck, Terry," Ed directed. Half grudgingly, I obeyed. As I scraped away the dirt, however, the trickle of water increased as if I were opening a tap. In a few minutes, my boots and socks were wet. Climbing out, I continued to shovel until the water had risen almost to the top of the hole. Looking satisfied, Ed motioned for me to get into the truck. "I'll let it run a while and we can cap it later," he said, revving the engine. I was speechless. "How did you know where to blast?" I plied him. "The same way that you're going to know God's plan for you," he came back. So he hadn't been ignoring me. "The hidden things are all known to God," he went on. Sometimes he hides a dream in our hearts, an unusual, challenging dream like the one he's given you. Don't be afraid of big dreams, Terry. That's what God has for you. But don't forget that he may use difficulties and challenges to toughen you along the way. The tough times get us ready for even bigger things. He paused as if he were going to say something, but then thought better of it. Just learn to listen and don't run out ahead of God. After that day, Ed's uncanny accuracy in blasting the well made me think twice about his advice. I was hooked on all his talk about dreaming the big dreams of God. If only he hadn't mentioned difficulties. Why did that word have to keep cropping up? None of us likes that word, difficulties. But we see repeatedly in the Bible how God does indeed use them to teach and to grow individuals who've given their lives to him. We're going to see next week just how the Lord does that in Terry's life.